he said, "Open the letter, Alec. It is for us both." I tore it open. It was Boris's will, dated a year after it. There was wood in the fireplace. No, wait, sorry. I tore it open. It was Boris's will, dated a year before. He left everything to Genevieve, and in case of her dying childless, I was to take control of the house in the Rue Sainte-Cécile, and Jack Scott, the management at Ept. On our deaths, the property reverted to his mother's family in Russia, with the exception of the sculptured marbles executed by himself. These he left to me. The page blurred under our eyes, and Jack got up and walked to the window. Presently he returned and sat down again, and I dreaded to hear what he was going to say, but he spoke with the same simplicity and gentleness. Genevieve lies before the Madonna in the marble room. The Madonna bends tenderly above her, and Genevieve smiles back into that calm face that would never have been except for her. His voice broke, but he grasped my hand, saying, "Courage, Alec." Next morning he left for Ept to fulfill his trust. Chapter 4. The same evening I took the keys and went into the house I had known so well. Everything was in order, but the silence was terrible. Though I went twice to the door of the marble room, I could not force myself to enter. It was beyond my strength. I went into the smoking room and sat down before the spinet. A small lace handkerchief lay on the keys, and I turned away, choking. It was plain I could not stay, so I locked every door, every window, and the 3 front and back gates, and went away. Next morning, Alcide packed my valise, and leaving him in charge of my apartments, I took the Orient Express for Constantinople. During the 2 years that I wandered through the East, at first in our letters we never mentioned Genevieve and Boris, but gradually their names crept in. I recollect particularly a message in one of Jack's letters replying to one of mine. "What you tell me of seeing Boris bending over you while ill, and feeling his touch on your face, and of hearing his voice, of course troubles me. This that you describe must have happened a fortnight after he died, and I say to myself that you were dreaming, that it was part of your delirium, but that explanation does not satisfy me, nor would it you." Toward the end of the 2nd year, a letter came from Jack to me in India, so unlike anything I had ever known of him that I decided to return at once to Paris. He wrote, "I am well, and sell all my pictures as artists do who have no need of money. I have not a care of my own, but I am more restless than if I had. I am unable to shake off a strange anxiety about you. It is not apprehension, it is rather a breathless expectancy of what God knows what. I can only say that it is wearing me out. Nights I dream always of you and Boris. I can never recall anything afterward, but I wake in the morning with my heart beating, and all day the excitement increases until I fall asleep at night to recall the same experience. I am quite exhausted by it, and have determined to break up this morbid condition. I must see you. Shall I go to Bombay, or will you come to Paris?" I telegraphed him to expect me by the next steamer. When we met, I thought he had changed very little. He insisted. He insisted, looked in splendid health. It was good to hear his voice again, and we sat and chatted about what life still held for us, and we felt that it was pleasant to be alive in the bright spring weather. We stayed in Paris together for a week. And then I went for a week to Ept with him. But first of all, we went to the cemetery at Sèvres, where Boris lay. "Shall we place the Fates in the little grove above him?" Jack asked, and I answered, "I think only the Madonna should watch over Boris's grave." Jack was none the better for my homecoming. The dreams of which he could not retain even the least definite outline continued, and he said that at times the sense of breathless expectancy was suffocating. You see that I do you harm and not good, I said. Try change without me. So we started alone for a ramble among the Channel Islands, and I went back to Paris. I had not yet entered Boris's house, now mine, since my return, but I knew it must be done. It had to be kept in order by Jack. There were servants there, and so I gave up my own apartment and went there to live. Instead of the agitation I had feared, I found myself able to paint there tranquilly. I visited all the rooms, well, all but one. I could not bring myself to enter the marble room where Genevieve lay, and yet I felt the longing growing daily to look upon her face and to kneel beside her. One April afternoon, I lay dreaming in the smoking room, just like I had lain 2 years before, and mechanically I looked among the tawny eastern rugs for the wolfskin. At last I distinguished the pointed ears and flat, cruel head, and I thought of my dream where I saw Genevieve lying beside it. The helmets still hung against the threadbare tapestry, among them the old Spanish morion, which I remembered Genevieve had once put on when we were amusing ourselves with the ancient bits of mail. I turned my eyes to the spinet, and every yellow key seemed eloquent of her caressing hand, and I rose, drawn by the strength of my life's passion, to the sealed door of the marble room. The heavy door swung inward under my trembling hands. Sunlight poured through the window, tipping with the gold wings of Cupid, and lingered like a nimbus over the brows of Madonna. Her tender face bent in compassion over a marble form so exquisitely pure that I knelt and signed myself. Genevieve lay in the shadow under the Madonna, and yet through her white arms I saw the pale azure vine, and beneath her softly clasped hands the folds of her dress were tingled with rose, as if from some faint warm light within her breast. Bending, with a breaking heart, I touched the marble drapery with my lips, and then crept back into the silent house. A maid came and brought me a letter, and I sat down in the little conservatory to read it. But as I was about to break the seal, seeing the girl lingering, I asked her what she wanted. She stammered something about a white rabbit that had been caught in the house, and asked what should be done with it. I told her to let it loose in the walled garden behind the house, and opened my letter. It was from Jack, but was so incoherent that I thought he must have lost his reason. It was nothing but a series of prayers to me not to leave the house until he could get back. He could not yet tell me why. There were the dreams, he said. He could explain nothing, but he was sure that I must not leave the house in the Rue Sainte-Cécile. As I finished reading, I raised my eyes and saw the same maidservant standing in the doorway, holding a glass dish in which 2 goldfish were swimming. Put them back into the tank and tell me what you mean by interrupting me, I said. With a half-suppressed whimper, she emptied water and fish into an aquarium at the end of the conservatory, and turning to me, asked my permission to leave my service. She said people were playing tricks on her, evidently with the design of getting her into trouble, and the marble rabbit had been stolen, and a live one had been brought into the house. The 2 beautiful marble fish were gone, and she had just found those common live things flopping on the dining room floor. I reassured her and sent her away, saying that I would look about myself. I went into the studio. There was nothing there but my canvases and some casts, except the marble of the Easter lily. I saw it on a table across the room. Then I strode angrily over to it. But the flower I lifted from the table was fresh and fragile and filled the air with perfume. Then, suddenly, I comprehended and sprang through the hallway to the marble room. The doors flew open, the sunlight streamed into my face, and through it, in a heavenly glory, the Madonna smiled as Genevieve lifted her flushed face from her marble couch and opened her sleepy eyes. In the court of the dragon. O thou who burn'st in heart for those who burn in hell, whose fires thyself shall feed in turn, How long be crying, mercy on them, God? Why, who art thou to teach and he to learn? In the church of Saint Barnabé, vespers were over. The clergy left the altar, the little choir boys flocked across the chancel and settled in the stalls. A Suisse in rich uniform marched down the south aisle, sounding his staff every fourth step on the stone pavement, and behind him came that eloquent preacher and good man, Monseigneur. My chair was near the chancel rail. I now turned toward the west end of the church. The other people between the altar and the pulpit turned too. There was a little scraping and rustling while the congregation seated itself again. The preacher mounted the pulpit stairs, and the organ voluntarily ceased. I had always found the organ playing at Saint Barnabé highly interesting. Learned and scientific it was, too much so for my small knowledge, but expressing a vivid if cold intelligence. Moreover, it possessed the French quality of taste. Taste reigned supreme, self-control, dignified, and reticent. Today, however, from the first chord I had felt a change for the worse, a sinister change. During the Vespers, it had been chiefly the chancel organ which supported the beautiful choir. But now and again, quite wantonly it seemed, from the west gallery where the great organ stands, a heavy hand had struck across the church at the serene peace of those clear voices. It was something more than the harsh and dissonant, and it betrayed no lack of skill. As it recurred again and again, it set me about thinking about what my architect's books say about the custom in early times to consecrate the choir as soon as it was built, and that the nave, being finished sometimes half a century later, often did not get any blessing at all. I wondered idly if that had been the case at St. Barnaby, and whether something not usually supposed to be at home in a Christian church might have entered undetected and taken possession of the West Gallery. I had read of such things happening too, but not in works on architecture. Then I remembered that Saint Barnabé was not much more than 100 years old, and smiled at the incongruous association of medieval superstitions with that cheerful little piece of 18th century Rococo. But now Vespers were over, and there should have followed a few quiet chords fit to accompany meditation while we waited for the sermon. Instead of that, the discord at the lower end of the church broke out with the departure of the clergy, as if now nothing could control it. I belong to those children of an older and simpler generation who do not love to seek for psychological subtleties in art, and I have ever refused to find in music anything more than the melody and harmony. But I felt that in the labyrinth of sounds now issuing from that instrument, there was something being hunted. Up and down the pedals chased him, while the manuals blared approval. Poor devil. Whoever he was, there seemed small hope of escape. My nervous annoyance changed to anger. Who was doing this? How dare he play like this in the midst of a divine service? I glanced at the people near me. Not one appeared to be in the least disturbed. The placid brows of the kneeling nuns, still toward the altar, lost none of their devout abstraction under the pale shadow of their white headdress. The fashionable lady beside me was looking expectantly at Monseigneur C. Reader's note, it literally says nothing but C and a bunch of lines, so I'm not making it up. For all her face betrayed, the organ might have been singing an Ave Maria. But now, at last, the preacher had made the sign of the cross and commanded silence. I turned to him gladly. Thus far I had not found the rest I had counted on when I entered St. Barnaby that afternoon. I was worn out by 3 nights of physical suffering and mental trouble. The last had been the worst, and it was an exhausted body and mind, and acutely sensitive, which I had brought to my favorite church for healing, for I had been reading The King in Yellow. The sun ariseth, they gather themselves together and lay them down in the dens. Monseigneur C. delivered his text in a calm voice, glancing quietly over the congregation. My eyes turned, I knew not why, toward the lower end of the church. The organist was coming from behind his pipes and passing along the gallery on his way out. I saw him disappear by a small door that leads to some stairs which descend directly to the street. He was a slender man, and his face was as white as his coat was black. Good riddance, I thought. With your wicked music, I hope your assistant will play the closing voluntary. With a deep, calm feeling of relief, I turned back to the mild face in the pulpit and settled myself to listen. Here at last was the ease of mind I had longed for. My children, said the preacher, one truth that the human soul finds hardest of all to learn, that it has nothing to fear. It can never be made to see that nothing can really harm it. Curious doctrine, I thought, for a Catholic priest. Let us see how we will reconcile that with the fathers. Nothing can really harm the soul, he went on in his coolest and clearest of tones, because... But I never heard the rest. My eye left his face, I know not for what reason, and sought the lower end of the church again. The same man was coming out from behind the organ and was passing along the gallery the same way. But there had not been time for him to return, and if he had returned, I must have seen him. I felt a faint chill, and my heart sank. And yet his coming and going was no affair of mine. I looked at him. I could not look away from his black figure and his white face. When he was exactly opposite to me, he turned and sent across the church, straight into my eyes, a look of hate, intense and deadly. I have never seen any other like it. Would to God I might never see it again. Then he disappeared by the same door, through which I had watched him depart less than 60 seconds before. To suddenly find myself the object of such hatred was exquisitely painful, and this man was an utter stranger. Now why would he hate me so? Me, whom he had never seen before? For the moment all other sensation was merged in this one pang. Even fear was subordinate to grief, and for that moment I never doubted. But in the next, I began to reason, and a sense of the incongruous came to my aid. As I have said, St. Barnaby is a modern church. It is small and well lighted. One sees all over almost with a glance, and the organ gallery gets a strong white light from a row of long windows in the clerestory, which have not even colored glass. The pulpit being in the middle of the church, it followed that, when I was turned toward it, whatever moved at the west end could not fail to attract my eye. When the organist passed it, it was no wonder that I saw him. I had simply miscalculated the interval between his first and second passing. He had come in that last time by the other side door. As for the look which had so upset me, there had been no such thing, and I was simply a nervous fool. I looked about. This was a likely place to harbor supernatural horrors. That clear-cut, reasonable face of Monseigneur C., his collected manner and easy, graceful gestures, were they not just a little discouraging to the notion of a gruesome mystery? I glanced above his head and almost laughed. That flyaway lady supporting one corner of the pulpit canopy, which looked like a fringed damask tablecloth in a high wind. At the first attempt of a basilisk to pose up there in the organ loft, she would point her gold trumpet at him and puff him out of existence. Again, I laughed to myself over this conceit, which at the time I thought very amusing, and sat and chaffed myself and everything else, from the old harpy outside the railing, who had made me pay 10 centimes for my chair before she would let me in. She was more than like a basilisk, I told myself, than was my organist with the anemic complexion. From that grim old dame to, yes, alas, Monseigneur himself. For all devoutness had fled. I had never yet done such a thing in my life, but now I felt a desire to mock. As for the sermon, I could not hear a word of it, for the jingle in my ears of, "The skirts of St. Paul has reached, having preached us those 6 Lent lectures, more unctuous than ever he preached, keeping time to the most fantastic and irreverent thoughts." It was no use to sit there any longer. I must get away. I must get out of doors and shake myself free from this hateful mood. I knew the rudeness I was committing, but still I rose and left the church. A spring sun was shining on Rue Saint-Honoré, I can't pronounce French, pardon me, as I ran down the church steps. On one corner stood a barrow full of yellow jonquil, pale violets from the Riviera, dark Russian violets, and white Roman hyacinths in a golden cloud of mimosa. The street was full of Sunday pleasure seekers, and I swung my cane and laughed with the rest. Someone overtook and passed me. He never turned, but there was the same deadly malignity in his white profile that there had been in his eyes, and I watched him as long as I could. His lithe back expressed the same menace. Every step that carried him away from me seemed to bear the same errand connected with my destruction. I was creeping along, and my feet almost refusing to move. There began to dawn on me a sense of responsibility for something long forgotten. It began to seem as if I deserved that which he threatened. It reached a long way back, a long, long way back. It had lain dormant all these years, but it was there, and presently it would rise and confront me. But I would try and escape, and as I stumbled as best as I could into the Rue de Riviole, across the Place de la Concorde, and onto the Quai. I can't pronounce this again, sorry. I looked with sick eyes upon the sun, shining through the white foam of the fountain, pouring over the backs of the dusky bronze river gods, on the faraway arc, a structure of amethyst mist, on the countless vistas of grey stems and bare branches faintly green. Then I saw him again, coming down one of the chestnut alleys of Cour de la Reine. I left the riverside and plunged blindly toward the Champs-Élysées and turned toward the Arc. The setting sun was sending its rays along the green sward of the Rond Point, and in the full glow he sat on a bench, children and young mothers all about him. He was nothing but a Sunday lounger, like the others, like myself. I said the words almost aloud, and all the while I gazed on the malignant hatred of his face. But he was not looking at me. I crept past and dragged my leaden feet up the avenue. I knew that every time I met him brought him nearer to the accomplishment of his purpose and my fate, and still I tried to save myself. The last rays of sunset were pouring through the great arc. I passed under it and met him face to face. I had left him far down the Champs-Élysées, and yet he came in with a stream of people who were returning from the Bois de Boulogne. He came so close that he brushed me. His slender frame felt like iron inside its loose black covering, and he showed no signs of haste, nor of fatigue, nor of any human feeling. His whole being expressed one thing: the will and the power to work me evil. In anguish, I watched him where he went. As he went down the broad, crowded avenue that was all flashing with wheels and the trappings of horses and the helmets of the Garde Républicaine, he was soon lost to sight, Then I turned and fled, into the Bois, and far beyond it. I know not where I went, but after a long while, as it seemed to me, night had fallen, and I found myself sitting at a table before a small café. I had wandered back into the Bois. It was hours now since I had seen him. Physical fatigue and mental suffering had left me no power to think or feel. I was tired, so tired. I longed to hide away in my own den. I resolved to go home, but that was still a long way off. I live in the Court of the Dragon, a narrow passage that leads from the Rue des Rennes to the Rue des Dragons. It is an impasse, traversable only for foot passengers. Over the entrance on the Rue des Rennes is a balcony supported by an iron dragon. Within the court, tall old houses rise on either side and close the ends that give on the two streets. Huge gates, swung back during the day into the walls of the deep archways, close this court after midnight, and one must enter them by ringing at certain small doors on the side. The sunken pavement collects unsavory pools. Steep stairways pitch down to doors that open on the court, and the ground floors are occupied by shops of second-hand dealers and by iron workers. All day long the place rings with the clink of hammers and the clang of metal bars. Now, as unsavory as it is below, there is a cheerfulness and comfort and hard, honest work above. 5 flights up are the ateliers of architects and painters, and the hiding places of middle-aged students like myself who want to live alone. When I first came to live here, I was young and not alone. I had to walk a while before any convalescents appeared, but at last, when I had almost reached the Arc de Triomphe again, an empty cab came along, and I took it. From the Arc to the Rue de Rennes is a drive of more than half an hour, especially when one is conveyed by a tired cab horse that has been at the mercy of a Sunday fete makers. There had been time before I passed under the dragon's wings to meet my enemy over and over again, but I never saw him once, and now refuge was finally close at hand. Before the wide gateway, a small mob of children were playing. Our concierge and his wife walked amongst them, with her black poodle, keeping order. Some couples were waltzing on the sidewalk. I returned their greetings and hurried in. All the inhabitants of the court had trooped out into the streets, and the place was quite deserted, lighted by a few lanterns hung high up in which the gas burned dimly. My apartment was at the top of the house, halfway down that court, reached by a staircase that descended almost into the street, with only a bit of passageway intervening. I set my foot on the threshold of the open door. The friendly old ruinous stairs rose before me, leading up to rest and shelter. Looking back over my right shoulder, I saw him, 10 paces off. He must have entered the court with me, and he was coming straight on, neither slowly nor swiftly, but straight on to me. And now he was looking at me, for the first time since our eyes encountered across the church. Now they met again, and I knew that the time had come. Retreating backward down the court, I faced him. I meant to escape by the entrance on the Rue de Dragon. His eyes told me that I should never escape, and it seemed ages while we were going, I retreating, he advancing, down the court in perfect silence. But at last I felt the shadow of the archway, and the next step brought me within it. I had meant to turn here and spring through into the street, but the shadow was not of an archway. It was that of a vault. The great doors on the Rue de Dragon were closed. I felt this by the blackness which surrounded me, and at the same instant I read it in his face, how his face gleamed in the darkness, drawing swiftly nearer. The deep vaults, the huge closed doors, their cold iron clamps were all on his side. The thing which he had threatened had arrived. It gathered and bore down on me from the fathomless shadows. The point from which it would strike with it was his infernal eyes. Hopeless, I set my back against the barred doors and defied him. There was a scraping of chairs on the stone floor and a rustling as the congregation rose. I could hear the Suisse's staff on the south aisle, preceding Monsignor to the sacristy. The kneeling nuns, roused from their devout abstraction, made their reverence and went away. The fashionable lady, my neighbor, rose also with graceful reserve. And as she departed, her glance flitted over my face in a vague disapproval. Half dead, or so it seemed to me, yet intensely alive to every trifle, I sat among the leisurely moving crowd and then rose too and went toward the door. I had slept through the sermon. Had I slept through the sermon? I looked up, and I saw him passing along the gallery to his place. Only his side I saw. The thin bent arm in its black covering looked like one of those devilish nameless instruments which lie in the disused torture chambers of medieval castles. But I had escaped him, though his eyes had said I should not. Had I escaped him? That which gave him the power over me came back out of oblivion, where I had hoped to keep it. For I knew him now. Death and the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him. They had changed him for every other eye, but not for mine. I had recognized him almost from the first, and I had never doubted what he was come to do. And now I knew, while my body sat safe in that cheerful little church, that he had been hunting my soul in the court of the dragon. I crept to the door. The organ broke out overhead with a blare. A dazzling light filling the church, blotting the altar from my eyes, and the people faded away. The arches, the vaulted roof, vanished. I raised my seared eyes to the fathomless glare, and I saw the black stars hanging in the heavens, and the wet winds from the lake of Hali chilled my face. And now, far away, over leagues of tossing cloud waves, I saw the moon dripping with spray, and beyond, the towers of Carcosa rode behind the moon. Death and the awful abode of lost souls, whither my weakness long ago had sent him, had changed him for every other eye but mine, and now I heard his voice, rising, swelling, thundering through the flaring light, and as I fell, the radiance increasing, poured over me in waves of flame. Then I sank into the depths, and I heard the King in Yellow whispering to my soul, "It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God." And that is the end of two stories from The King in Yellow. The next story, which is known as The Living Sign, is where we will start our reading the next time. But this will be all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. It is a bit different, I must admit. It is quite different in its tempo, especially in comparison to, say, Lovecraft, which is more like what we more would consider straightforward horror. The tempo here is a bit more subdued, and it's not always clear where the text is going. It's quite interesting. Yeah. So I'll leave you all with that. And if you haven't read this, or if you feel like looking at this yourself, this is a public domain book. It's available on Project Gutenberg, where you can download and look at it yourself if you like, just to get a sense of how the text feels to you, because to me, at least, it is very, very different. It is like the author expects it to be horrifying in a way that is, we're just a little bit too jaded these days to appreciate it. I'm not sure. It's subtle. It's almost sleepingly subtle. more akin to something that you would find in a dream, a weird dream, than in real life. That's quite interesting, but it's also kind of hard to focus on when you're reading it because it tends to get away from you. It's not very clear where the text is going, simply put. The direction of the text and the story isn't clear. So if I make any weird pauses and such in the text, it's because, frankly, the language is just that way. It's not clear where the pauses should go, and where you would have dramatic pauses in the texts and things like that. It's just not clear. So anyway, next time we start reading The Yellow Sign, and I will try and get some more information about Carcosa, which is a reoccurring theme in this book. I will see if I can do a little informative thing in the start of the episode so we can have a little more context to what we are reading. I think that might be useful. And with that, I'd like to wish you all a very good night. Bye-bye.